to everyone that's just joined, we're just going to give it a couple minutes while people filter into the meeting, and then we will get started. Thanks for joining. Give it another minute or so before we get started. Okay, people are still filtering in, but I think it's really good for us to kick off. So thank you everyone for joining today's webinar on primarily on the new heat recovery sales operation and maintenance set contract. We've got a great discussion today from our legal, commercial and technical experts. As you may have seen, if you're on our mailing list, that we recently introduced a brand new recovered heat contract template. Now the SOMS are a suite of template heat contracts for use by anyone involved in a district heating scheme. So got a bit of a discussion about this and sort of in general about recovered heat projects and their importance over the next few years. And before we start, just thought I'd go over some quick housekeeping. So the session will be recorded. You may have seen that the recording and the transcription has already started, which happens automatically in a Teams webinar. So everyone's cameras and microphones are turned off automatically for this session unless you are a organizer or a speaker. So if you do have any questions, please type them into the Q&A function and we'll do our best throughout the meeting to answer them. However, if we don't answer everyone's questions, then we'll either follow up afterwards or everyone who attends will receive a feedback form where you're able to submit any more questions and we can pick up over email offline after this meeting. And we will also at the end of that feedback form provide all attendees with links to the webinar recording and the slide deck if you miss anything in this call. So just to introduce our fantastic speaker lineup that we've got lined up for everyone today. So we've got Tom, who is a partner at LuxNova, one of our legal experts. We've got Ken Honeysett from Triple Point, head of Clean Heat and program manager for the GHNF. We've got Kit, who is a CEO of Hermetica Black, and we've got Nick from Enfinium as a energy development manager. So fantastic lineup. And what I'll do without further ado is hand straight over to Ken to give us a bit of a scene setting.
Thank you, Michael, and morning, everyone. Thanks so much for giving over your time this morning. We've still got one or two people drifting in, so much better that as people get comfortable, they find themselves stuck with me and hopefully are in place to hear from our three brilliant industry sector experts over the course of the morning. As Michael said, I'm head of Clean Heat at Triple Point, where my team and I manage the Green Heat Network Fund on behalf of the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. you probably know this already. It's the thing that pricked your interest. But today's webinar is focused on recovered heat, how heat networks can access it, structure deals around it, and do so in a way that works for absolutely everyone at the negotiating table. It's a topic that sits right at the heart of what we're trying to achieve through the Green Heat Network Fund. So delighted to have three chaps with us today. But before I hand over to them, I wanted to start with a question that might seem a bit philosophical. Bear with me though, because I think it's also a practical one. Michael, can we have the next slide, please? As I was thinking today, I was reflecting on the fact that when we talk about this sector, we use an awful lot of phrases almost interchangeably. We talk about waste heat, we talk about recovered heat, excess heat, surplus heat. As a non-sector expert, I don't mind telling you that I have tripped over all of those in different contexts, using them largely as synonyms for one another. Here, though, we found a couple of examples of definitions that we've featured online that might be familiar to very many of you today. We've seen people talking about recovered heat as the result of capturing and utilizing heat from industrial and commercial purposes for reuse. We've seen a definition of waste heat, usually with this word unavoidable in it. Waste heat is the unavoidable heat generated as a byproduct, which would be dissipated unused. Recovered heat, on the other hand, is waste heat successfully reused. Now, this isn't a semantic point about linguistics. Michael, if you can flip me over to the next slide, please. Research from Loughborough University suggests that actually these words all land really very differently with the people that we're trying to structure our deals with. This study was actually with households in a research setting, but I'd argue it's every bit as relevant in a commercial setting too and across a negotiating table. You can see here that phrases like recovered heat land particularly well. A respondent said, if we can recover heat and use it in my home, but also at places like hospitals, it's going to save the taxpayer money. On the contrary, at the other end of the spectrum, if you're giving me a low-grade product, low-grade heat, then maybe I'll pay a low-grade price. Secondary heat, or secondary heat sounds like second best. This isn't just semantics. This stuff matters. Final thought from me. As you listen to our speakers today, it's worth asking yourself, what language are they using? And for you and your businesses and your projects, how are you framing those conversations? And what signals does that language send to your colleagues, clients, and investors before the conversation has even begun? That's your homework for the morning. But right now, over to our presenters. First up is Kit Gillibrand from Hermetica Black. Kit, over to you.
Thanks very much, Ken. If we can go on to the next slide, I'll do a very, very brief introduction. Next slide, even again, to Hermetica Black. For those of you who don't know us, we are a development and asset management advisory business. We're focused on the energy and infrastructure sector, particularly where that interfaces with real estate and things like district energy. So we've been involved in supporting customers and clients to negotiate offtake agreements around this sort of recovered waste that we're talking about today, and we'll get into some of that. So next slide. So just maybe to pick up on something that Ken's just introduced, I think there's a second element to how we define this heat, which is what would this heat otherwise be used for? And I think that for us is the single biggest sticking point we've seen in people not reaching a deal. So what a deal needs is two parties, or potentially more, who both understand the nature of what's being provided and think that there's a fair price for it. So primarily what we're talking about here is heat as a byproduct of someone's business. It's not their core business, and that very much means in our experience that it's probably not anybody's day job. So people are focusing on whatever their day job is. Now, in a second, we'll introduced Nick from Infinium, where I think, sort of the exception where sometimes it does become someone's day job because a company is starting to think about heat as a resource. So thinking about our framework for these kind of deals, I think it's the moment we see a deal that comes across a table that's incredibly complicated, doesn't have a fair apportionment of risk, and starts to push on people's existing business model, that for us is a little bit of a red flag. I think where we've worked with data centers, industrial waste processes, manufacturing sites, the things that we've seen work best are where there's a very clear definition of what is the deal. Is it resilient heat? Is it just give us heat when you've got it available? Those are the sort of things that start to drive price. So if we pop onto the next slide, we can dig into that a little bit deeper. So getting people to say yes is the hardest part of any deal. And although we've put heat pricing right at the top of this list, in our experience, heat pricing comes from that definition of what is the nature of a deal we're talking about. So some of you may have seen a report that we were commissioned to do by the GLA alongside colleagues at AECOM, which was looking at data center heat offtake. Now, if you go to a data center and say, we want you to provide us with an availability guarantee on heat, I suspect you're not even going to get through the door. That was sort of what a lot of that discussion was about. If you're saying, actually, we'll take heat when it's available and we'll trust that underlying that heat is the fact that you have uptime guarantees to your existing customers that go way beyond heat provision, then you can start to get somewhere. The flip side of that coin is, are you guaranteeing that source of heat a service in itself? Again, to use the data center example, are you able to guarantee cooling capacity to them? I suspect you're probably not as a district heating operator, or certainly not with the sort of penalties that a data center operator would require for that sort of critical infrastructure. So being really clear about what the service and what the nature of the offtake is probably the single biggest thing you can do. Similarly, if you're looking at entities that are statutory operators, so people like water treatment companies, for example, you have to understand the statutory environment that they work in. If they're required to move a sewer pipe because there's a change in where a road goes, for example, you cannot put them in breach by denying them that opportunity. So if you don't understand what their core business is and how your heat offtake is going to fit with that requirement, then you can't really get to having a sensible discussion around things like price. And look, you can see on this list to the left a whole series of factors that start to flow from that definition of who's doing what. Things like demarcation of responsibility. How do people's contractors behave when they come onto site? What are the rules that need to be followed? What are the additional costs that overseeing those rules starts to put in place on the source of heat? And how do they recover that additional cost? There's been a big temptation, sort of back to Ken's earlier point about, oh, it's waste heat, so it's low grade or it's free. That actually moving away from the price for the heat itself is preferable if you can say, but we're not going to create additional cost for you. And Tom will talk in a second about two of the separate models that have gone into the SOMS set on that basis. I think last point before I hand over to Nick perhaps is it's really important as a heat network operator engaging with this kind of source of heat to think about timing and also the impact on your customers. So if you're coming to market with a new network and you're trying to sell to customers a heat price, which is based on getting into a contract with a source of recovered heat, being very clear about who is taking the risk of if you fail to do that. Does that mean the customer price goes up? Do you have to get this negotiation finished before you get through your first investment close period? How do these risks daisy chain across your development cycle is really, really critical. I think what we've seen in a lot of projects today is people moving away from recovered heat as the initial cornerstone of a network, but then anticipating bringing those schemes on. Now, hopefully, part of some of the benefit of the work that Tom has done in bringing the standard sort of contract sets together is to speed up that process and get everyone more comfortable more quickly by not starting with a blank page. But being realistic around that timing is absolutely critical in our experience. With that, I think it'd be great to hear from Nick on his specific experience with Infinium. So I will pass on to him to introduce himself.
Thanks very much, Kit. Nick, and development manager at Infinium. Have plants. In total, there are about 64. So the map should be coming through. Can you see the map?
Nick,
Stuck.
I think we're. It may just be my internet, but you're sort of cutting in and out for me, which is probably why I didn't hear you say next slide.
Okay, sorry. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. I think it's just connection, but it seems to be improving a little bit.
Okay. So just to
We're still struggling, Nick. You're a man that needs to be heard. We know how good this deck is. I wonder, should we flip through to Tom's slides perhaps and come back to Nick when he's stabilized his connection in a minute? Does that work? Thanks, Michael.
Okay. All right. So I'm Tom Bainbridge, partner and one of the founding partners at Lux Nova Partners. So specialist clean energy law firm. That's all we do. And we're the legal partner as part of the Triple Point Consortium, helping to manage GHNF and before it HNIP programs. As part of that work, we have let me go before that. Our seat at the table in terms of district heating is having been involved in it for a very, very long time. Collectively, we've been involved in district heating for it is into multiple decades. I've been in it for 2 decades, just over 2 decades. Other members, one member who now sits as a sort of consultant to us 4 decades, which is not bad going. So a lot of experience around district heating. Anyway, so we were part of the consortium delivering these programs, and part of that work we were asked to develop some template contracts. So these SOMS, standard operation and maintenance set, they flowed out of actually some heads of terms that we had produced for, I think it was bays back in those, or was it even deck in those days, for the detailed project delivery guidance, working alongside Arup. And yeah, we had sort of tried to break a district heating project into a number of component parts, saying that these are the kinds of relationships you'll typically see. People in those projects might take different roles, and here are the sorts of things you want covered. So here are the heads of terms. Then we deliver these full contracts and publish them. I think Nick, sorry, Michael, if you go on to the next slide, it might. Yeah. So there are a set of contracts which are publicly available. They come with guidance, explanatory notes, and we have just updated them. So the existing set of contracts, we've tried to bring them up to date in a number of areas, and in some areas we've tried to simplify them as well, with a format that has something along the lines of a contract data sort of front end, standard terms and conditions, and then more technical and commercial schedules in the rear end as well. So try to do that because that is the way that sort of industry is preferring to see the documents. Yeah, so there are this full suite. And then if we can move on to the next slide, we've added this new one. So recovered heat offtake and access agreement, topic of today's talk, or the main focus of today's talk. So the purpose of this, in contrast to the remainder of the suite of SOMS contracts where there was established practice, and there were contracts in use in each of the areas, and it was trying to bring some standardization to those contracts. Here, this is where there isn't standard practice. There are a few pioneer deals, but we're a long way from standard practice. And a lot of people are starting with this blank sheet of paper. So the aim here was to try and give some guidance to the parties to these negotiations to help them along the way and get them, provide them with a framework for those negotiations. What we did, we distilled down what we thought were the key points across any technology type and across any commercial model, and captured them in this template contract. But we focused around two commercial models. So what we're calling Model A is one with a price in, sort of per kilowatt hour. So measured price, measured heat recovery. And as Ken has said, as Kit has said, language does matter, matters a lot. And as a former environment lawyer, you mentioned waste and you mentioned recovery. They have very, very specific meanings, and byproducts takes them out of the context of waste in the first place. So it matters a lot, and it matters a lot in terms of the emotion about where value is attached. I say you will find in many sectors, and I think the district heating industry does itself a disservice by concentrating on this thought of it being waste heat and therefore of zero value. And I think associated with zero value is sort of it must be something that is cheap and easy for the heat source to get rid of. So that isn't always the case. But as Kit has also mentioned, there's the opportunity as well that it is seen as someone could be a supplier of heat, someone could be giving access to their heat, someone could be providing cooling. And if you turn it round, and that's in the data center context, and whereas a heat network operator is likely looking for guarantees of performance, guarantees of output from a heat source, from a data center perspective, their ideal would be to have guarantees of performance on cooling. So, heat network, are you prepared to give that? If you're not prepared to give that, then don't expect the same obligation from the heat source. So go in with realistic expectations. Now back to Model A. So we developed a commercial model that allows for it either to be a price for heat extracted as measured, or for cooling provided, again, as measured. And there are technical schedules that then marry up with that Model A choice. There's a Model B, which is looking for at an access fee where it's simply saying, heat source is saying, I've got from infrastructure, it is warmer than ambient, and I'm going to allow you to come in and gain access to that equipment and take heat away. Now, it doesn't mean that's without conditions, of course. There may well be, very likely going to be some strict conditions. But that's the payment. There's then probably around an access fee. Could be anything from, could be up from zero upwards. The documents, as I say, are intended to try and address any technology source, but with this focus on the two key areas that agreed with DESNZ around data centers and wastewater treatment plant. They contain full drafting around all of these areas that you'd expect in this kind of agreement, and covering exclusivity, guarantees, termination, value change in law, decommissioning of rental credits, and so on and so forth. But not with the expectation that all of that drafting is going to be used. So the guarantees in particular may well be inappropriate in many contexts, especially in the early days of heat recovery. As the market develops, we would expect this to change. If you could move on to the next slide, Michael. So what these this contract is doing is, say, providing a template to assist negotiations. It is not mandating that this is the contract you must use. But one thing, if we bring it back to a GHNF context, people looking for GHNF funding for a project, it won't really be an acceptable position to say, well, we have a complete blank sheet of paper, we have nothing to work from. There is a precedent. You can use it and you'll be expected to use it, or again, justify why you're doing something else. And of course, something else is absolutely fine if it's a sensible position. What the templates do is say it is recognizing the tensions between those interests of heat source and heat off-taker. It addresses those sensitivities around the technical boundaries. There may be safety issues. There may be regulatory overlay. In wastewater treatment plant in England and Wales, it's a very different treatment to Scotland, for example. So very different approach. Exclusivity, that feeds into it too. There are also sort of additional guidance that I should be sort of drawing to attention. So, and these are referred to in the guidance notes with the template document. So for exclusivity zones, for example, on wastewater treatment plant, there is some work that was done by WSP for the department on exclusion zone guidance methodology. So there is a work through detailed guidance there as well. Yeah, so the way to use the document is as a toolbox. Use the headings, use the guidance, let it guide you to think about things and to prompt you to think and discuss and reach a sensible position. And you're going to have to build in, of course, your project specifics. Like with all the SOMS contracts, they are templates and they will need to be tailored to each project. Next slide, please, Michael. So the contracts can all be downloaded from the Triple Point Heat Network website. The link is there and available free of charge. And if you have feedback on the document, of course, we're actually would welcome that. We did run a mini consultation, and I can't say that the response was overwhelming, but feedback it would be welcome, so that we could do a future evolution of the template contract. Next slide, please, Michael. Okay, yeah, and yes, so if you want to hear about more changes to the SOMS and about other events, then do sign up to the TP Heat Networks subscriber mailing list as well. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. We don't speak about the SOMS nearly enough. We try and shine a light on our brilliant investee projects as much and as often as we can. But actually, it's been a source of real pride for Tom and his team, for all of us at the delivery partner group, for the DESNES team that commissioned them, quite the extent to which the SOMS pack is used in whole or part, as Tom said. Think of it not as a Bible, but as a toolbox across not just the Green Heat Network Fund, but the HNIP before it, and bringing these latest documents bang up to date in this vitally important sector has been a real coup. Tom, before we lose you just for now, can you just tell us this latest SOMS module has come out at a different time in the market to when the last set were prepared, a different regulatory environment now. Can you help us understand the extent to which you've been able to get ahead of the regulatory curve particularly given those current heat network regulations?
Yeah, so we've finished updating the contracts at the end of last year, just before the standard authorization conditions were finalized, which was great. So then had to go back through again and update them. What we've done is we've made some accommodation. It is a light touch accommodation for the standard authorization conditions. It is definitely not trying to replicate the authorization conditions. That would be contractual overkill anyway, although some entities might want to see more conditions fleshed out. Other sides of those sort of negotiations would push back hard against that. So again, we just took a view of a light touch incorporation. May come back around to a little bit later on with the heat recovery offtake and access agreement. There is still an evolving landscape around what the draft SI is, current draft SI is saying, when that comes out for public consultation around what are the minimum requirements of contracts for heat source offtake, the same as that there will be minimum requirements for a building connection agreement.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. And we'll test Michael's slide shuffling now. Nick, are you back with us? How's that broadband
does
signal
this
of yours?
sound all right?
Crystal clear, my friend.
Great. Okay, so
floor is yours.
Thank you. So sorry, yeah, thrilled to be invited to talk about what we're doing in Infinium. We are an energy from waste operator, and we have 6 out of current 64 EFWs in the UK, one of which is still in construction in West Birmingham. My day-to-day job, as Kit said, is to contract the heat and the power by private wire to customers. And really, the reason for doing that is that our owner eventually, work its way backwards, it ends up being pension funds and sort of long-term money that like the stability that heat offtakes and those actually contracted long-term energy supplies provide. So these plants are built to serve the needs of those regions' waste needs. So our primary customers are fuel suppliers, waste suppliers who go collect waste and bring it to our facilities for us to sanitarily dispose of and recover the energy. So to date, in terms of heat recovery, our largest one is feeding a paper mill down in Kent, and more recently up in Leeds at the Skelton Grange site to feed a district heat network there. But we're working on schemes at various stages of feasibility across the fleet. I think move on to the next slide, please. So we use very, very proven technology across our fleet. So this is effectively moving grate incineration in boilers. And then, as you can see on the screen, quite a lot of the footprint of the plant is to deal with the flue gases that come off that, because it's a unhomogeneous waste stream. A lot of stuff is brought to our bunkers that is, when burnt, it produces pretty nasty stuff. So a lot of our processes and costs of doing this go into cleaning up what comes off. And then we recover the heat for electricity generation through steam turbines, but also heat recovery. And this really helps to improve the overall efficiency of the energy from waste recovery process. So we love it, and our owners, they have stakes in other European businesses that see the benefits that the heat offtakes can provide. We're also quite active in the waste to energy carbon capture and storage as well. So part of my role is helping with that. And we've done a few pilots on our sites, so that's the kind of next phase after we've contracted all the heat and power. So just you can see from the screen, the process is that the waste is put in a bunker into the boiler, and then the steam cycle. Then I think if we go to the next slide, so we've been operating our heat offtake at Kemsley for a while now. I think one of the main learnings from these and from other schemes and developments are that you have to acknowledge each entity's priorities, as Kit referenced. So, you know, the primary purpose for energy from waste plants being built is the sort of at scale sanitary disposal of household waste and commercial industrial waste. So really, we have to keep everything running so that people can, you know, divert these waste streams away from landfill and divert them from exporting abroad to be dealt with elsewhere. So there's a big emphasis on all that we do in keeping things running. But equally, we have to we need to recover the energy, because that's part of the business case that's put together initially to fund these plants, because they're about £500 million each to build. So it's very important that the energy is sold as well to pay back all the investments and debt. So the just on the screen now, I talk about the Z factor, which is for our sector, for energy from waste plants. This is the key kind of underlying principle of how the heat's priced. This is sort of compensation for what happens when we take heat, we divert heat away from the power production. And all EFWs since I think 2010 or 2011 in the UK have had to be built with CHP enabled, and that means different things for different sites, different interpretations. But mostly this is taking heat from the actual steam turbine itself, and you want to prioritize the low pressure bleeds so you can minimize the impact on the power generation. But really, I think one of the main learnings is on the screen, so is keep it simple. You know, we're in it for the long-term price certainty, and equally, you know, customers usually want the same thing, long-term price certainty. So indexation on the heat tariff is quite important. Not being too clever, I think, is key. And also, I think with the risk versus rewards that Kit touched on, making sure that both parties acknowledge that each have got their own risks, and the reward needs to balance that risk. So in various contractual terms, just acknowledging that, you know, what each party's exposures are is quite key. And lastly, just the ultimate aim would be to have a happy customer, happy off-taker, and an arrangement that one can just set and forget. So monthly billing cycles go through, and any issues are dealt with quickly. So that's really most of what I wanted to say today. That's it.
Nick, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. Really interesting. You've touched on some of these bits already, but I wonder if we can tease some more of them out. You mentioned top of the shop that Infinium's primary activity is that of a volume waste handler, waste operator, and waste processor. You're a very substantial power generator. Heat is different again. Can you help us understand the business case rationale for Infinium in entering into these offtake agreements? Why go to the effort?
Yeah, sure. So I think why we like these heat offtakes is that it effectively increases the overall efficiency of the energy recovery process for us, and that consequently has a lot of benefits. So it's a more efficient process means more megawatt hours are extracted from each ton of waste that arrives at our site for us to process. So that's a good thing for everyone, really. And it moves us up a kind of asset class, if you like. from, incinerator is technically a sort of facility that just burns waste and doesn't recover anything from it. And then when you get over a certain threshold of power generation, you move up to energy from waste. But then, with the heat, we're energy from waste with CHP, which, for example, at Kemsley, enabled us or allowed us and secure a long-term contracts for the difference on the biogenic fraction of the power that we export to grid. So that's a great reason in itself. But I think key is also that that natural hedge on the volatility of the revenue stream that heat can provide. So if the offtake customer is there to do the same, then the price can be completely decoupled from gas and power market volatility, which is especially pertinent in today's environment with what's going on in the Middle East. So those are the sort of core reasons, really, I think.
Really cool, Nick. Thank you. I'm gonna stick with you for a next question because your Wi-Fi has just started to wobble again. So I'm gonna max out on you while we've got you. To the end of your presentation, you spoke about the customer, that happy customer who's entered into the set it and forget it relationship. That presumes a degree of resilience. Customers are dependent on you for their heat supply. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you build resilience and availability into the heat supply agreements, and what reassurances can you provide about disruption in the future?
Yeah. So hopefully you can hear me. I think before we get to the contract, technically we obviously need to provide resilience to the waste customers as well. So we are ever more looking at ways that we can increase our availability at both ends of the facility. And now this looks like interseasonal bale wrap and store for the fuel. We also then consequently have very large bunkers, which mean that we can typically get 7 to 8 days of input if something were to go wrong with the road or rail network. And then we have, most of our facilities have at least 2 boiler lines. So for a heat offtake, we kind of design in a bit more resilience by having bypasses and the ability to service that customer's needs if both, say the turbine and one of the boilers were down. So there's a lot of technical resilience built into it. In addition, our plants with the dry air coolers can also run in island mode as well. So were something to happen to the local public electricity network, we can still provide that heat. So yeah, contractually, we're pretty confident about our ability to service the customer's needs throughout the year, and we build in clauses around notification of our annual planned outages, which tend to naturally sit outside of peak winter heat demand as well, just through the way that the sort of service contracts work on those big outages. But ultimately, it comes down to the risk reward. So if all of that fails and we do have a bad year, then there can be a sort of compensation which is commensurate with the sort of reward that we get from the heat deal.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. Kit, back to you. One of your slides was, I'm going to say it was something called getting to yes. It was a big, long list of some pretty fundamental issues. You had things like pricing on there, you had availability, you had IP, demarcation. You're at the sharp end of negotiating a lot of these contracts. In your experiences, which are the hardest of those to resolve and why?
I mean, all of them.
You've got to do better than that, my friend.
Yeah, no, I'm warming up. So I think, as I kind of mentioned, I think price is what comes last, frankly. And I can see sort of Ian's asked a question, I think, around sort of the fair allocation of risk and benefit, and particularly in respect of sort of statutory undertakers. I think the thing that's hardest to get past is this thing of both parties understanding what the other party wants to do and can do. So if you take that question of the main sewer as a source of heat, there's the sort of the development process is going to involve a whole load of monitoring of how much energy is available, what's the temperatures and all of those sort of things. I think there is a question there, if you're a heat network operator or developer, saying at some point you have to either get comfortable with the fact that a sewer is quite likely to still be there for the foreseeable. People still have that function, and that needs to be serviced. So can you get comfortable with that, but also really understanding why that sewer might not end up being there? So with a movement in a road, for example, or maybe the sort of the route of sewerage being changed. Now, there's a whole load of design-led points on that, which are maybe prioritizing the main sewer outflows and so forth, rather than more minor ones that help people get comfortable. And I think to answer your question, Ken, the sort of the bits which cause the most problems are where the two parties don't sit down and help each other understand the world they both live in. So we'll stick with water as the example. There's a big discussion about what are the role that you water body want to play, water company want to play. Is it you can just have access to our sewer, but here are the rules that you have to abide by, and be that allowing maceration, are you putting heat exchangers in the main flow, are you having a side chamber, does that make you a statutory waste party as well, all of those sort of things. And that's usually we can get to a point where both parties get as quickly as possible to actually what's emerging here is a risk that we're not comfortable with, or no, we can get comfortable with that risk. What's the process to go through? Is it understanding what the permitting requirements are, what the design standard is? How do we check that before anything gets built? How do we check it once it's built? How is it monitored in practice? Who's got condition risk over existing assets that might have been there for years and years and years and not particularly well touched? All of those sort of things. I think it's really easy to say, well, look, I just need the heat and I need a guarantee it's going to be there. If that's the case, I think you end up paying a premium because you're asking someone to take a risk, right? So that once you've been through that process of saying, what is it you can do? What is it you would prefer to do? That's when you get into price point. So it's a very roundabout way of answering your question, Ken, but I think that the key thing that we see failing is that failure to understand the other party's business model. Once you've got that well understood, then you can start thinking about, okay, what are the terms? What are the price point? And when do we need to do this? Is this our main source now, or is it going to come later down the line when we've had time to work through and get to a resolution?
Brilliant, Kit. Thank you. And thanks too for sweeping up Ian's question in our Q&A. There's another that sat in there, and it's about Z factors that Nick, you mentioned in your presentation. You described the role that Z factor plays in effectively pricing, valuing the trade-off between heat and power generation. I wonder the extent to which, Nick, it's that dynamic, that definition is well understood. I wonder the extent to which Z factors become sticking points in negotiations. And John asked a similar point. He noticed that you used a Z factor of 10 in your presentation. He's commented that's higher than he's seen in other plants and wonders whether that's indicative of a new normal. So expand this point of Z factors, would you, Nick? And then John's point about the significance of 10.
Okay. I think, like any thermal generation, the performance can vary hugely on temperatures and pressures in operation, and how much the heat off-taker is extracting. So it can be a bit all over the shop. But really, what the simple way to I think to deal with this is use the best available information one has, which for us is usually a set of contractual heat mass balance documents that shows how the plant is expected to perform, and sort of contract on that basis. And in a way, then you're taking the risk as an operator of the heat source that it does perform in that way. As long as, you know, contractually the off-taker is also obliged to say return the heat back at a certain temperature and flow rate. So it's quite you know, it's a bit of a dialogue between the off-taker and the heat source as to how well the performance is in reality. And to John's point, I think the 10, well, I've used that because that's the sort of industry standard on from the BRE technical note that's used to calculate the emissions factor for EFW heat. But in reality, as I say, we can see higher or much lower than that in practice, depending on where the balance of high pressure and low pressure bleeds as well. So if I've
Brilliant.
answered the question.
Thank you, Nick. And thanks, John and Ian, for those questions. Another from me, and maybe Tom will start with you, but I suspect in terms of the practical application of it, it's every bit as relevant to Nick and Kit as well. Back to the SOMS, one of the reasons why we're here today. You've stressed the importance of trying to keep things simple, and Nick used that phrase, set it and forget it when we can. How do you balance simplicity, Tom, with the need to protect both parties in a deal over the significant 20 plus years of an infrastructure deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way of looking at that is saying that actually if the negotiation actually addresses the key points that are likely to come up during the life of that contract, they recognize the interest of each party as they will be played out during the life of that contract, then hopefully you're able to capture something then that is able to last the test of time without having to go back through lots of contract variations because you hadn't anticipated issue X, Y, or Z. I mean, I was just sort of thinking about some of the things that Kit and Nick have been saying, and just thinking another example, just going through like the bit about what are the expectations around the delivery of heat from an EFW plant. Okay, now read it wider from a heat source. From a DH operator's perspective, the key things that you're looking at sort of what volume of heat, you're looking at the availability of that heat. And so, can we capture some kind of guarantee because we want to have this reliable heat source for our heat network? And as Kit says, fine, deal with price a bit later in the negotiation chain. But is the heat off-taker going to stand behind paying for the heat that comes through? So is this actually just, if we take the heat, we're going to pay for it, or are we going to take heat on a take or pay basis, i.e. commitment to take a certain volume of heat? And if we're going to have that commitment, who stands behind it? What kind of credit support, what some payment security is there to offer back to the heat source? Because the more that there is that commitment to take heat, and the more that commitment is something that can be really relied on, okay, your heat source now has the possibility of thinking, well, okay, I can make a bigger investment because it's backed off and it'll pay off over time. And I'm not going to get left stranded here. So now you start getting into the territory of, okay, well, then there's the issue of, okay, if heat source is installing more equipment, then assets goes back into the issue of asset boundaries, goes into the issue of who's installing what, goes into the issue of who's accessing what bits of plant during installation phase, during operation phase, and so on. You have to go through all of these issues in detail for your technology, for your offtake approach, and work through on a eyes open basis. And the more that you can do that, the more you can set up a contract that can last for the life of that infrastructure and for the life of that investment. And of course, depending on how you're financing, then you have a bankable project or you don't.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tom. I've started clock watching, and weirdly, we've got all the way through to 11:55. We've got 5 minutes left, so let's have a last question in 2 parts, perhaps, that I'll direct to each of you in turn. We've spoken a lot about what good looks like and how good deals happen, but can we have a thought from each of you on what kills a deal? What are the most common reasons recovered heat projects fall over from time to time, and what can developers do to help avoid those pitfalls? And then secondly, if I may, you're all experienced hands at all this with your very, very different perspectives. Can you give the audience 1 or 2 hard-earned lessons from your time at the front line? What might you have wished going into some of the negotiations to have known ahead of times? Let's do this in running order. Why don't we start with you, Kit, top of the shop?
Going first. I think things that have really killed deals. I think we've talked about this a little bit, haven't we? But I think one thing we haven't talked about is senior support. So quite often people spend a lot of time at local facility level, and that's great, but someone needs to make a decision based on a sort of business as usual, probably investment case that might even be in a different jurisdiction, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the earlier you can get that senior buy-in so that the process that we've outlined in terms of engagement can get followed through and it's not a surprise, I think the better. I think that links probably to my sort of top what do I wish had been in place. I think that certainty around everyone understanding what it is that we're talking about, what's the nature of this deal, and that having been through sort of a significant enough senior decision-making process around, is this plant going to stay here for the next at least 10 years, et cetera, is probably right at the top of that list, Ken.
Brilliant, Kit. Thank you. Same question to you, Nick.
I think quickly, I think the sort of high capital costs of doing heat recovery projects is probably the biggest killer when you work out what customers at the other end of the pipe are willing to pay for heat, and then how much it's going to cost to get that heat to them. Is I think the costs of doing that are so prohibitive sometimes that does kill projects. Another one is time, just letting projects slip on. You miss windows, especially with the FWs that try and run 24/7 and then have an annual outage. You can miss that window quite easily to do works, to connect in things. So capex and time, really.
Brilliant. And thanks to you, Nick, we managed to get cost of heat on the agenda at 11:58. Who'd have thunk it that might surface? Same question to you, Tom. Finish us off.
Okay. So I suppose first point I go as the deal killer is that misplaced idea about how you address resilience guarantees. So kind of back to my previous point. The hard-earned lessons, it kind of just builds on what Nick was saying on the timing, and I was thinking about there are plant availability windows quite often, especially with the FW, but not exclusively FW. If you miss that opportunity, you're not going to get that downtime for another year or two. We've seen on other projects where, you know, it may be road access. A window comes up and it's a brief window, and it's closed for a very long time after that. So the timing for the project, that may be technology specific, or it may be just site specific. The build time and I'd say the negotiation time. I think some people have unrealistic expectations around how long it takes to negotiate these things. In the EFW sectors, it certainly can move faster, but we have been, let's say, on the receiving end of this, where there's an expectation that a contract was going to be closed within, I've heard, a few months. 5 years later, it hasn't been closed. And I'm not saying we're negotiating the contract, we're waiting for the negotiated contract. So there, timing is a real challenge. So going in with realistic expectations and trying to move through fast. So hopefully, again, the SOMS can help in the context where there's no template to move forwards that bit quicker.
The need to move at pace and timing is a challenge. It's midday, so ain't that the truth? Thank you all, the three of you, so very much for your contributions this morning. We have, for blindingly obvious reasons, focused on energy from waste today and hearing the story about the amazing work Nick and his team are doing in Infinium. Kit, you walked us through some of the issues as it affects the data center world too. I want to leave our audience in no uncertain terms that we're dealing in recovered waste from a multiplicity of sources, day in, day out, through our work in the GH&F, just as we did on the HNIT before it. On another day, we might have spoken about some of the challenges associated with getting heat from the sewers or from wastewater treatment plants. We could have brought on somebody to talk about a case study of taking waste heat from the underground. We could have spoken about the very real challenges about taking waste heat from some of our heavy industry that we have here in the UK, all of which Tom, Kit, me and my team are working their way through on a daily basis. If any of that is interesting to any of you and you want to hear us come back and talk about those areas, do please let us know when you provide your response on the feedback forms. Do please let us know if there are other questions that you'd like answered that we can follow up with you as well. I'm just going to say a final thank you to everyone. Thanks to you too, Michael, for organising us so well today. Do you want to come on and tell us the final housekeeping bits and pieces on what our audience might expect from us next?
Yeah, I think you covered most of it. We'll be sending an email out after the webinar with a link to the feedback form, and then once you've all completed this, you should receive a thank you page with the links to the webinar recording and the slide deck as well. So if you had any questions that weren't answered in this, or you think of them after this, then please put them into that feedback form and we'll endeavour to get back to you as soon as possible.
Brilliant. Time for lunch. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Tom, Kit, Nick. Thanks to all of you. Speak soon, I hope.
Cheers. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.